90-year-old woman gives birth to a baby that defies science. How did this happen? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Margaret Harper lived a quiet life in the small, picturesque town of Willowbrook. At 90 years old, she was the oldest resident in the community, a title she carried with quiet pride. Known for her sharp wit and warm smile, Margaret spent her days tending to her flower garden, hosting tea for friends, and sharing stories about the good old days with anyone willing to listen. She had lived through wars, economic depressions, technological revolutions, and the rise of modern medicine. But nothing in her long, eventful life had prepared her for what was about to happen. It all started with a visit to the doctor. Margaret had been feeling unusually fatigued for weeks. Though she initially brushed it off as a sign of old age, her best friend, Irene, insisted she get it checked out. "You're not invincible, Margaret," Irene said over their weekly tea. "You might be tough as nails, but even you have to see the doctor once in a while." Reluctantly, Margaret scheduled an appointment with Dr. Keaton, the town's longtime physician. She sat in the sterile examination room, tapping her fingers on the armrest of her chair as the doctor reviewed her blood work. "Well, Margaret," Dr. Keaton began, his brow furrowed. "Your results are interesting." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Interesting how?" "Don't keep me in suspense, Keaton. I'm not getting any younger." He hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It appears you're pregnant?" Margaret burst into laughter, the kind of deep, hearty laugh that echoed through the room. "Pregnant? Oh, Keaton, you've really outdone yourself this time. Did Irene put you up to this?" "She's always been a prankster." But Dr. Keaton didn't laugh. He set the papers down on his desk, folded his hands, and looked Margaret straight in the eye. "I'm not joking, Margaret. The blood work confirms it. Your hormone levels indicate early-stage pregnancy." The laughter died in Margaret's throat. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. "That's impossible," she said finally. "I'm 90 years old. My childbearing years ended, well, decades ago." "I know how it sounds," Dr. Keaton said gently, "but the results are undeniable. We'll need to run more tests, of course, but for now, it appears that you are, in fact, pregnant." News of Margaret's condition spread quickly through Willowbrook. In a town where everyone knew everyone, it was impossible to keep a secret this big. Whispers and rumors swirled around her like a storm, each one more outlandish than the last. "Did you hear about Margaret Harper? 90 years old and pregnant. Must be some kind of miracle. Or maybe a medical mistake. I don't know what to believe. How is that even possible?" Margaret did her best to ignore the gossip, but it was hard not to feel the weight of the town's curiosity. Even her closest friends struggled to hide their disbelief. "I don't understand, Margaret," Irene said during one of their tea sessions. "How could this happen?" "I mean, you know what I mean." Margaret sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I don't have an answer, Irene. All I know is what the doctors have told me. And if this is truly happening, then it must be for a reason." The medical world was equally baffled. Margaret was referred to a team of specialists at a renowned hospital in the city, where her case became the subject of intense study. Doctors, scientists, and researchers crowded into her hospital room, their faces alight with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It defies everything we know about human biology," one doctor said, reviewing Margaret's charts. "At her age, the reproductive system should be completely dormant. And yet, her hormone levels are consistent with early pregnancy," another chimed in. "This could rewrite the textbooks." Margaret, for her part, remained remarkably calm amid the chaos. She had always been a woman of faith, and though she didn't claim to understand the how or why of her situation, she trusted that there was a greater purpose at work. "I've lived long enough to know that life is full of surprises," she told the doctors with a wry smile. "This just happens to be a particularly big one." As the weeks passed, Margaret's pregnancy progressed without complication. Each checkup revealed normal development, with the baby growing steadily and healthily. The medical team was astounded. By all accounts, Margaret's body was behaving as though she were decades younger, defying every scientific expectation. The media soon caught wind of the story, and Margaret found herself thrust into the national spotlight. Reporters camped outside her home, eager for a glimpse of the miracle mom. Headlines proclaimed her as a medical marvel, and talk shows debated the implications of her pregnancy. Is it a miracle of science or something divine? One anchor asked during a primetime segment. Whatever the explanation, Margaret Harper's story has captured the world's imagination. Margaret took the attention in stride, though she declined most interview requests. "I'm just an old woman having a baby," she told one persistent reporter. "I'll leave the explanations to the experts." Despite the overwhelming attention, Margaret's personal life remained largely unchanged. She continued her daily routines, tending to her garden and enjoying quiet moments with friends. But beneath her calm exterior, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Late one night, as she sat in her favorite armchair, Margaret ran her hand over her growing belly. "Who are you?" she whispered to the child she carried. "Why have you come into my life now, after all this time?" The baby kicked in response, a gentle flutter that brought tears to Margaret's eyes. She didn't have the answers, but in that moment, she felt a deep, unshakable connection to the life growing inside her. The turning point came during a routine ultrasound. As the technician moved the wand over Margaret's belly, the room fell silent. Dr. Keaton, who had accompanied her to the appointment, leaned closer to the screen, his expression one of astonishment. "What is it?" Margaret asked, her voice tinged with concern. The technician hesitated, then turned the screen so Margaret could see. "Your baby," she said softly. "It's remarkable." The image on the screen showed a perfectly formed fetus, but there was something unusual, something extraordinary, about the way the baby's heart glowed faintly, almost like a soft, internal light. "It's not something we've ever seen before," Dr. Keaton admitted. "But whatever it is, it seems beautiful." Margaret stared at the screen, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and wonder. "A miracle," she murmured. As Margaret left the hospital after the ultrasound, her mind buzzed with questions. The image of the glowing heart stayed with her, a source of both awe and curiosity. Was the baby truly different, or was this simply a phenomenon science had yet to explain? And if it was different, what did that mean for the child's future and her own? The media frenzy around her pregnancy intensified. The glowing ultrasound image, leaked to the press by someone at the hospital, became a global sensation. News outlets debated the implications of Margaret's miracle baby, while social media was flooded with theories, ranging from divine intervention to alien ancestry. "Whatever it is, it's not normal," one commentator said during a heated panel discussion. "This could change everything we know about human biology." Margaret's quiet life was no longer her own. Reporters camped outside her house, and letters poured in from strangers around the world. Some offered congratulations, others expressed skepticism, and a few warned her of potential dangers. Through it all, Margaret remained steadfast, choosing to focus on the life growing inside her rather than the chaos outside. The pregnancy continued to progress smoothly, defying every expectation. At her 6-month checkup, Margaret's doctors marveled at her vitality. Her blood pressure was perfect, her energy levels were stable, and the baby's development was flawless. By all accounts, Margaret was healthier than most women half her age. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Keaton said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Your body is performing like it's 25 years old." Margaret chuckled. "Well, I've always been a bit of an overachiever." But privately, she wondered if the baby's unique nature had something to do with her newfound health. Could the glowing heart they had seen in the ultrasound be a sign of something more? The question lingered in her mind, but she chose not to dwell on it. For now, she was content to embrace each day as it came. The town of Willowbrook, once a sleepy community, was now a hub of activity. Journalists, scientists, and curious onlookers flocked to the area, hoping for a glimpse of Margaret. Some locals resented the intrusion, while others saw it as an opportunity to put their town on the map. "Margaret's always been special," Irene said during an interview with a national news outlet. "She's the heart of this town, and now the whole world gets to see what we've always known." But not everyone was supportive. A small but vocal group of skeptics gathered outside Margaret's home, holding signs that read hoax and science, not sensation. Margaret ignored them, refusing to let their negativity overshadow the joy she felt for her unborn child. One evening, as she sat on her porch, a young woman approached her cautiously. She looked to be in her early 20s, her face a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Mrs. Harper?" the woman asked hesitantly. Margaret smiled warmly. "That's me. And you are?" "My name's Emily," she said. "I'm a medical student. I read about your story and I had to see you for myself." Margaret gestured for Emily to sit beside her. "Well, here I am. What do you want to know?" Emily hesitated, then blurted out, "How are you so calm? I mean, your situation is extraordinary. Aren't you scared?" Margaret thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Life has thrown me many challenges, Emily. At my age, you learn that fear doesn't help. What matters is how you choose to respond. And I choose to embrace this as a gift." As Margaret entered her third trimester, the world watched with bated breath. Scientists continued to study her case, hoping to uncover clues about the baby's unique development. Religious leaders weighed in, calling it a miracle that reaffirmed their faith. And conspiracy theorists spun elaborate tales about government experiments and extraterrestrial intervention. Through it all, Margaret remained a pillar of grace. She kept her focus on preparing for the baby's arrival, knitting tiny blankets and assembling a nursery in her modest home. Her friends rallied around her, offering support and encouragement. "You've got the whole world watching you," Irene said one afternoon as they folded baby clothes together. "But don't let them forget, you're still Margaret Harper, the strongest woman I know." Margaret smiled, touched by her friend's words. "Thank you, Irene. I'll do my best." The day of the birth arrived sooner than expected. Margaret was sitting in her living room, reading a book, when she felt the first contraction. It was sharp and sudden, taking her by surprise. She reached for her phone and called Dr. Keaton. "It's time," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. An ambulance arrived within minutes, whisking her away to the hospital. The staff, who had been preparing for this moment for months, sprang into action. Margaret was wheeled into a private delivery suite, where a team of doctors and nurses awaited her. The labor was intense but remarkably quick. Within hours, Margaret delivered a healthy baby boy. The room fell silent as the doctors examined him, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The baby's heart glowed faintly, just as it had in the ultrasound. The light was soft and warm, pulsating gently with each beat. Despite its unusual appearance, the baby was otherwise perfect, with 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a strong, steady cry. Margaret held him close, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my miracle," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." The news of the baby's birth sent shockwaves around the globe. The first images of Margaret cradling her glowing child became an instant sensation, sparking debates, celebrations, and even more questions. Scientists were eager to study the baby, but Margaret set firm boundaries. "He's not an experiment," she told them. "He's my son." She named him Isaac after her late husband, who had passed away decades earlier. "It feels right," she explained to Irene. Isaac always believed in miracles. As the days turned into weeks, Margaret adjusted to life as a new mother. She marveled at Isaac's glowing heart, which seemed to brighten whenever he was happy or content. It was as though his very essence radiated warmth and love. But there were also moments of mystery. Isaac's presence seemed to have a calming effect on those around him. Nurses reported feeling unusually at peace while holding him, and visitors to Margaret's home often left with a renewed sense of hope. The scientific community continued to study Isaac from a respectful distance, conducting non-invasive tests with Margaret's permission. Their findings only deepened the mystery. The glow appears to be a form of bioluminescence, one researcher explained during a press conference. But the mechanism behind it is unlike anything we've seen in humans, or any other species, for that matter. Religious leaders hailed Isaac as a symbol of divine grace, while skeptics dismissed him as a biological anomaly. Margaret, however, didn't concern herself with the debates. "To me, he's just Isaac," she said simply. "My beautiful, miraculous boy." Life with Isaac quickly became a blend of wonder and routine. Margaret adapted to motherhood with surprising ease, finding joy in the little moments. His tiny fingers curling around hers, the way his glowing heart pulsed gently as he slept, and the soft coos he made whenever she sang to him. The world outside her home, however, was anything but routine. Reporters continued to swarm Willowbrook, eager for updates on the miracle baby. Margaret had turned down countless interview requests, determined to shield Isaac from the chaos. But she couldn't stop the flow of letters, gifts, and even pilgrims who traveled from across the globe to catch a glimpse of the child who had captivated millions. One afternoon, as Margaret rocked Isaac to sleep, she heard a knock at the door. She sighed, expecting another reporter or curious visitor, but when she opened the door, she found Emily, the young medical student she'd spoken to months earlier. "Mrs. Harper," Emily said, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to see how you and Isaac are doing." Margaret smiled warmly. "Come in, Emily. You caught us at a quiet moment." Emily stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to Isaac, who was nestled in Margaret's arms. His heart glowed faintly, a soft, rhythmic light that seemed almost otherworldly. "He's beautiful," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret beamed. "He's my little miracle." Emily hesitated, then asked, "May I hold him?" Margaret studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." As Emily cradled Isaac, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. It was as if the glow from his heart wasn't just light. It was something deeper, something that resonated with her very soul. "It's incredible," Emily said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I've never felt anything like this before." Margaret watched her with a knowing smile. Isaac has that effect on people. Over time, the scientific community's interest in Isaac grew more respectful. Margaret agreed to occasional visits from researchers, as long as their tests were non-invasive and didn't disrupt Isaac's life. The findings continued to astound them. Isaac's glow appears to be linked to his emotional state, one scientist explained during a presentation. When he's content, the light is steady and warm. When he's distressed, it flickers and dims. It's as though his heart is a direct reflection of his feelings. The phenomenon defied explanation, but it also brought people together. Isaac's story became a symbol of hope in a world often divided by conflict and uncertainty. People from all walks of life found inspiration in the little boy with the glowing heart, and Margaret couldn't help but marvel at the impact her son was having on the world. As Isaac grew, so did his unique abilities. By the time he was 6 months old, Margaret began to notice subtle changes in the way he interacted with the world. Plants in her garden seemed to thrive in his presence, blooming faster and more vibrantly than ever before. Animals, too, were drawn to him. Birds often perched on the windowsill when he was near, chirping softly as if in conversation. One day, while playing on the floor with Isaac, Margaret noticed a small flower growing in the crack between the floorboards. It hadn't been there before, and she couldn't recall ever seeing a plant take root indoors. "That's strange," she muttered, picking up Isaac and examining the flower more closely. As if in response, Isaac giggled and reached for the flower, his tiny fingers brushing its petals. The glow from his heart seemed to intensify, and Margaret could only stare in wonder. "Is this you?" she whispered, looking into his bright, curious eyes. "Are you doing this?" Isaac cooed in reply, his expression one of pure joy. Margaret shared her observations with Dr. Keaton during their next visit. The doctor listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "Margaret, I don't know what to make of this," he admitted. "Isaac is extraordinary, but these abilities, they go beyond anything we've ever encountered." Margaret nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "I don't need all the answers, Keaton. All I know is that he's here for a reason." Dr. Keaton smiled. "You've always had a way of looking at things with faith, Margaret. It's one of the reasons I admire you." The community of Willowbrook continued to rally around Margaret and Isaac. Irene became an honorary grandmother, spending countless hours doting on the baby and helping Margaret with the challenges of motherhood. "You've got a special one here," Irene said one evening as she rocked Isaac to sleep. "The world may not understand him yet, but they'll come around." Margaret smiled. "He's brought so much light into my life, literally and figuratively." I just hope I can give him the life he deserves. You already are, Irene said firmly. You're his mother, and that's all he needs. Despite the love and support surrounding them, not everyone was kind. Some skeptics continued to question the authenticity of Isaac's abilities, accusing Margaret of staging an elaborate hoax. Others warned of potential dangers, suggesting that Isaac's uniqueness made him a target for exploitation. Margaret did her best to ignore the negativity, focusing instead on the joy Isaac brought into her life. But one evening, as she sat on the porch with Irene, a group of protesters marched past her house, holding signs that read "fraud" and "stop the sensation." Do they ever give up? Irene muttered, glaring at the protesters. Margaret shook her head. People fear what they don't understand. It's human nature. But it's not right, Irene said fiercely. You and Isaac don't deserve this. Margaret reached over and placed a hand on her friend's arm. It's all right, Irene. Let them say what they want. Their words can't change the truth. As Isaac approached his first birthday, Margaret decided to host a small celebration at her home. She invited close friends and family, as well as a few of the researchers who had been part of Isaac's journey. The day was filled with laughter and love, a reminder of the community that had grown around Margaret and her son. Isaac, dressed in a tiny bow tie, giggled as he smashed his first birthday cake, his glowing heart casting a soft light over the room. As the guests gathered for a toast, Margaret stood at the center, holding Isaac in her arms. Thank you all for being here, she said, her voice filled with emotion. This past year has been the most unexpected, challenging, and beautiful chapter of my life. And I couldn't have done it without your love and support. The room erupted into applause, and Margaret felt a swell of gratitude. Isaac had not only brought joy into her life, but had also brought people together in ways she never could have imagined. As Isaac's first birthday faded into memory, Margaret found herself reflecting on the whirlwind years she had experienced. Her son had brought an unimaginable transformation into her life, not only through his remarkable glow and unique abilities, but also through the way he had drawn people together. Strangers had become friends, skeptics had become believers, and Margaret herself had rediscovered a profound sense of purpose. But with Isaac's growing abilities came new questions. The strange occurrences around him, flowers blooming in unexpected places, animals drawn to his presence, only grew more frequent. Margaret began keeping a journal, documenting every extraordinary moment. March 3rd, Isaac crawled into the garden today. When he touched the wilting daisies, they sprang back to life. April 15th, a stray dog wandered into the yard. Isaac reached out to pet it, and the dog immediately calmed, lying down beside him as though they'd known each other forever. May 8th, Irene noticed the old oak tree in the backyard has been growing new branches at an incredible rate. She swears it's because of Isaac. Margaret shared her journal entries with Dr. Keaton during their regular visits. The doctor, though fascinated, could offer no concrete explanations. Margaret, these phenomena go beyond anything we can study with conventional science, he admitted one afternoon. Isaac's abilities are, well, they're unprecedented. Margaret nodded, her expression thoughtful. Maybe they're not meant to be explained. Maybe they're just meant to be appreciated. As word of Isaac's abilities spread, the media attention around Margaret and her son reignited. Reporters and filmmakers flocked to Willowbrook, hoping to document the miraculous child. Margaret was cautious about granting access, but she eventually agreed to a documentary that promised to focus on Isaac's story with respect and integrity. The filming process was both exciting and challenging. Margaret and Isaac were followed by cameras as they went about their daily lives, from their quiet mornings in the garden to their weekly trips to the park. The crew was careful not to intrude, but Margaret couldn't help but feel the weight of the world's eyes on her. Do you ever feel overwhelmed? Emily, now a frequent visitor and close friend, asked one evening after the crew had packed up for the day. Margaret sighed, rocking Isaac in her arms. Sometimes. But then I look at him and it all feels worth it. He's a gift, Emily. And if sharing his story can bring hope to others, then I'll do it. The documentary, titled The Light Within, the story of Isaac Harper, premiered months later to critical acclaim. It was praised for its heartfelt portrayal of Margaret and Isaac's bond and for exploring the broader questions of faith, science, and the unknown. The film brought renewed attention to Isaac's story, but it also sparked deeper discussions about what it meant to embrace the miraculous in a world often defined by logic and reason. By the time Isaac turned 2, his abilities had become even more pronounced. He could calm crying babies with a touch, make plants grow with a glance, and bring a sense of peace to anyone who held him. Margaret marveled at his gift, but she also worried about the responsibility that came with it. Will he always be seen as different? She asked Dr. Keaton during one of their visits. Will he ever have a chance at a normal life? The doctor considered her question carefully. Margaret, Isaac's life will never be normal by conventional standards. But maybe that's not a bad thing. He has a purpose, one that's uniquely his. And with you as his mother, I have no doubt he'll find his way. Margaret found comfort in those words, though the questions lingered in her mind. She wanted Isaac to have a childhood filled with joy and discovery, free from the burdens of expectation. But she also knew that his abilities were a gift to the world, one that couldn't and shouldn't be hidden. One summer afternoon, Margaret and Isaac visited the park where they often spent their mornings. As usual, a small crowd had gathered, curious to catch a glimpse of the glowing child. Margaret tried to keep their activities low-key, but it was impossible to ignore the attention Isaac attracted. As he toddled toward a group of children playing under a tree, Margaret noticed a young boy sitting alone on a bench. His shoulders were hunched, and his face was etched with sadness. Without hesitation, Isaac waddled over to him, his little hands reaching out. The boy, startled at first, looked up as Isaac touched his arm. The glow from Isaac's heart seemed to brighten, casting a soft light over the boy's face. Slowly, the sadness in his eyes melted away, replaced by a tentative smile. Margaret watched in awe as the boy began to laugh, the sound clear and pure. Soon, the other children joined them, drawn by Isaac's presence. Within moments, the group was playing together, their laughter echoing through the park. A woman approached Margaret, tears in her eyes. "That's my son," she said, gesturing to the boy. "He's been struggling with anxiety ever since his father passed away. But just now, it's like something lifted. Your son, he's incredible." Margaret smiled, her heart swelling with pride. He has a way of bringing out the best in people. As Isaac continued to grow, so did the impact of his presence. Margaret noticed that his glow had a way of fostering connection and healing, not just in individuals but in entire communities. Stories began to circulate of towns where Isaac's visits had brought people together, mended broken relationships, and even inspired acts of kindness and generosity. Margaret remained cautious about overexposing Isaac, but she couldn't ignore the good he was doing. With the help of trusted friends, she organized small, private gatherings where people in need could meet Isaac and experience his calming, healing presence. One such gathering took place at a community center in a nearby city. Families struggling with grief, illness, and hardship came together, drawn by the hope Isaac seemed to offer. As Margaret watched her son interact with the crowd, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "Every step of this journey has been worth it," she whispered to Irene, who stood beside her. "He's changing lives, one heart at a time." Irene nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "And he's just getting started." But not everyone was ready to embrace Isaac's uniqueness. A group of skeptics and activists began to voice concerns about the ethics of Margaret's decisions, accusing her of exploiting her son for attention. Though the accusations were baseless, they stung nonetheless. Margaret faced the criticism with her usual grace, but one evening as she sat alone with Isaac, she let her emotions surface. "Am I doing the right thing?" she murmured, stroking his soft hair. "Am I protecting you, or am I putting you in harm's way?" Isaac, as if sensing her distress, placed his tiny hand on her cheek. His heart glowed brighter than ever, its warmth spreading through her like a soothing balm. In that moment, Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of peace and clarity. "You're right, my love," she said softly. "We'll face this together." Margaret's faith in her son, and in herself, never wavered. She knew their journey would continue to be filled with challenges and unknowns, but she also knew that Isaac's light was a force for good. It wasn't just his glow that set him apart, it was his ability to bring hope, healing, and unity to a world that desperately needed it. As she tucked Isaac into bed that night, Margaret whispered a quiet promise. "I'll always protect you, my miracle boy. No matter what." And as the glow from Isaac's heart illuminated the room, Margaret felt a deep, unshakable conviction that the best was yet to come. By the time Isaac turned 3, his abilities had become an inseparable part of the world's fascination with him. His glowing heart, which once captivated the medical community and inspired religious leaders, was now a beacon of hope for many. People from all walks of life reached out to Margaret, sharing stories of how Isaac had touched their hearts, even from afar. Letters poured in daily. One was from a soldier who had seen Isaac's story while stationed overseas. "Knowing there's something pure and good in the world has kept me going," he wrote. Another came from a terminally ill woman who claimed that simply watching Isaac on the news had brought her peace. "I feel like he's a reminder that there's beauty even in the hardest moments." Margaret read each letter, carefully cataloging them in a box she kept in Isaac's room. She wanted him to understand, someday, how much his existence had meant to so many people. One autumn morning, Margaret decided to take Isaac to a nearby orchard. The trees were heavy with apples, their branches swaying gently in the crisp breeze. It was one of Margaret's favorite places, a peaceful escape from the constant attention they often faced. Isaac toddled through the rows of trees, his tiny hands reaching for the low-hanging fruit. Margaret laughed as he tried to carry an apple twice the size of his hand. "You've got big dreams, don't you?" she teased, scooping him up and planting a kiss on his forehead. As they wandered further into the orchard, they came across an elderly man sitting on a wooden bench. He was hunched over, his face lined with sorrow. Margaret hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Good morning," she said kindly. "Mind if we join you?" The man looked up, his eyes weary but curious. "Of course," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's a public orchard." Margaret sat beside him, Isaac on her lap. The baby's heart glowed softly, catching the man's attention. "Your son," he said, his voice trembling. "Is that real?" "It is," Margaret replied, her tone gentle. "His name is Isaac." The man nodded, his eyes fixed on the light emanating from Isaac's chest. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Like hope in the flesh." Margaret tilted her head. "You sound like someone who could use some hope." The man sighed deeply. "My wife passed away last month. She loved this orchard. We used to come here every year to pick apples together. I thought being here might help, but it just feels empty without her." Isaac, who had been quietly observing, reached out and touched the man's hand. The glow from his heart brightened, casting a warm light over them. The man's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what just happened, but I feel lighter." Margaret smiled, her own eyes misty. "That's Isaac," she said simply. "He has a way of reminding people that they're not alone." Stories like these became common in Margaret and Isaac's life. Wherever they went, people seemed to find healing in Isaac's presence. It wasn't just his glowing heart, it was the way he seemed to connect with others on a deeper level, as though he could sense their pain and offer comfort without words. But with this gift came new challenges. Margaret often found herself wondering how to balance Isaac's role as a symbol of hope with his need to grow up as a normal child. She wanted him to experience the joys of childhood, making friends, exploring the world, and discovering his passions, without the weight of the world's expectations on his tiny shoulders. One evening, she confided her concerns to Irene. "I don't want him to lose his innocence," she said, her voice heavy with worry. "But how do I protect him when so many people look to him for answers?" Irene placed a comforting hand on her friend's shoulder. "You're doing everything you can, Margaret. Isaac's light is a gift, but you're the one who nurtures it. As long as you love and support him, he'll find his way." Margaret nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. I just need to keep focusing on what matters most, being his mom." As Isaac grew older, he began to ask questions about his glow and the attention it brought. "Why do people stare at me, Mommy?" he asked one day, his innocent eyes searching hers. Margaret knelt down to his level, taking his small hands in hers. "Because you're special, Isaac." You have a light inside you that makes people feel happy and safe. It's a gift, and it's part of what makes you. Isaac tilted his head thoughtfully. Is it like magic? Margaret smiled. Maybe it is. But no matter what it is, it's yours. And you get to decide how to use it. Her words seemed to satisfy him, and he returned to playing with his toys. But Margaret knew the questions would only grow as he did. She resolved to guide him with honesty and love, helping him navigate the unique path ahead of him. One of the most remarkable moments in Isaac's young life came during a community event in Willowbrook. The town had organized a fundraiser to support local families in need, and Margaret had been asked to bring Isaac as a guest of honor. The event was held in the town square, with booths offering food, games, and crafts. A stage had been set up for performances, and the atmosphere buzzed with energy and excitement. As Margaret and Isaac arrived, the crowd erupted into applause. Isaac, now old enough to understand the attention, waved shyly from his stroller. His heart glowed brightly, casting a warm light that seemed to envelop everyone nearby. During the event, a young girl approached Margaret, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. "These are for Isaac," she said shyly, holding them out. Margaret smiled, crouching down to accept the flowers. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you." The girl hesitated, then added, "Can I ask him something?" Margaret glanced at Isaac, who nodded eagerly. "Of course," she said. The girl knelt down, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Isaac, do you think I can be special like you someday?" Isaac tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. Then, to Margaret's surprise, he reached out and touched the girl's hand. His glow brightened, and the girl gasped softly. "You already are," he said simply, his voice clear and sincere. The girl's face lit up with a radiant smile, and she hugged Isaac tightly. Margaret's heart swelled with pride and emotion. Her son, despite his young age, was already changing lives in ways she couldn't have imagined. As the years went on, Margaret continued to guide Isaac through the challenges and joys of life. Together, they built a world filled with love, wonder, and resilience. And while the questions about Isaac's abilities remained, one thing was certain: his light was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. Margaret often thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. From the shocking discovery of her pregnancy to the miraculous birth and the incredible moments that followed, every step had been filled with both uncertainty and grace. And through it all, she had learned that life's greatest gifts often come in the most unexpected forms. One evening, as Margaret tucked Isaac into bed, he looked up at her with his bright, curious eyes. "Mommy," he said, "what's my light for?" Margaret smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Your light is for whatever you want it to be, my love. It's for making the world a better place, one heart at a time." Isaac nodded, his glow softly illuminating the room. "Then I want to help people, just like you helped me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You already are, Isaac. And you always will." As she kissed his forehead and turned out the light, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. Isaac's journey was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead.